In a strange twist of events, I actually read some books in May. I'm just gonna get straight into it. Here are mini reviews of the 7 books that I read in May. Kicking things off with Idol by Louise O'Neill. I mean, is anyone surprised that I fucking loved this book? Like, oh my god, it was so good. Louise has done it again. She can do no wrong. She is flawless, a queen. Everything this woman writes, I just love. And I think, like, don't know what it is that she puts in these books that are just like, they're like Leanne catnip, you know? Everything that I want is in here. So in this book, we are following Sam, who is this kind of really famous writer, influencer kind of person. Kind of imagine like your kind of Elizabeth Days and your Dolly Aldertons, but also kind of like Gwyneth Paltrow kind of level of obsession, where like particularly with single women, there's almost like a level of worshipping and obsession that they have around them, but also that kind of Gwyneth Paltrow thing where like some of what she's promoting is like really quite questionable. Sam is on this really high pedestal for a lot of young women. She's kind of like their guru. And she writes this essay about one of the most intense sexual experiences that she's had in her life. Sam identifies as straight, but she identifies an experience that she had with a female friend of hers from when she was a teenager as being one of these like really incredible sexual experiences of her life. But then that friend gets in touch and she remembers this incident very differently, and in fact says that this encounter was non-consensual. And I think the way Louise O'Neill handles this whole situation is just superbly done. Throughout the book, we have a very murky understanding of what actually happened on that night. And while it certainly becomes clear that Sam is an incredibly unreliable narrator, it's also not always clear how much of what Lisa, her friend, is saying is true. In her creation of Sam, Louise O'Neill has done what I think she does best. She has created this extremely flawed, unlikable character, but she has painted her in such a nuanced way that there's still a level of sympathy for the horrible things that she's been through in her past and the things that she has to endure in her present day as well. She's not a likable character. She's not a character that you root for. She's a character that you definitely see as doing horrible things, but you also simultaneously understand that what has also happened to her is unjustified and unfair. For instances, the experiences she has in her history with ex-partners, ex-boyfriends. Louise O'Neill also takes a real scalpel to what is kind of deemed cancel culture. Now, I think more often than not when people speak about cancel culture, they're actually just talking about accountability culture. You know, there's nothing wrong with people being held accountable for their actions. But I think the discussions that Louise brings forth about people who are at the forefront of media, particularly social media attention, and the dangerous game they play when they put themselves on a pedestal for moral integrity and how quickly that can be torn down. This book was so compelling. It was a fascinating exploration of the obsession that can come with female friendship, the obsession that Sam receives from her legions of fans, the obsession she has with their adoration for her, the obsession that she has with Lisa. All of that tension is building towards a real crescendo at the end of this book. I absolutely devoured this book. I thought it was incredible. If you want to hear even more thoughts on this book, I'm gonna link Aoife's reading vlog where she reads this book in the description, so you can check that out as well. But yes, highly recommend you pick this one up if you haven't already. I also read The Road Trip by Beth O'Leary. I had read her 2 previous books, The Flat Share and The Switch. I didn't love The Road Trip as much as I enjoyed those 2 books, but I still had a really great time. So this begins when Addie and her sister are on this road trip up to rural Scotland where their friend is about to get married. Not long after they set off, a car rams into the back of them, and it turns out that in this car is Addie's ex-boyfriend, and she hasn't seen him since their traumatic breakup 2 years earlier. Her ex-boyfriend Dylan and his very annoying best friend Marcus are going to the same wedding, so the easiest solution seems they all get into the one car and make the journey up to Scotland together. And of course that doesn't run smoothly for a number of reasons. So we are seeing their journey making their way up to Scotland for this wedding, but we are also seeing scenes in the past from the beginning of the relationship between Dylan and Addie. I think this would be a really great holiday read because a lot of those scenes of them initially meeting happen in this kind of, I can't remember if it's like a French villa or a Spanish villa, but it had like the warm holiday romance kind of vibes to it. And I really enjoyed simultaneously seeing where the fraught relationship is between them 2 years post breakup and following the journey how they ended up at that point. I thought how Beth O'Leary explored how our lives don't always end up where we anticipated them going was done really well. I also really enjoyed how she discussed how class can be an issue in dating if you have very different life experiences. However, I thought this book was just a bit too long. I thought there was a lot that could have been cut out, and in fact there's a whole kind of subplot with another character that is going to the wedding that I just found completely unnecessary. I don't really understand why he was there. Like, there is a bit of a twist that comes up with that character and it just felt like unnecessarily complicated. It felt like it didn't need to be there. But in saying that, I did think it was a lot of fun. I found the dynamics in the central male friendship in this book really interesting. So yes, would recommend if you're just looking for a fun time read. I also read The Hating Game by Sally Thorne, and this is an enemies to lovers romance that is set in the publishing industry. So we have Lucy and Josh, who have always had this kind of tension at work. It's meant to be like a hatred, but honestly, like, it lasts about 20 pages. Like, it's so obvious that like the tension between these two is attraction. At no point do I actually feel like they're genuinely enemies. Like, it feels like what the author is trying to present as hostility is just so obviously like flirting. But both Lucy and Josh are being considered for a very senior position in their company, and that is another source of the animosity between this pair, them both going for this same job. Of course, eventually they end up acting on their attraction to one another, and there were some things that I liked about this book and some things that I just found remarkably dull. So the moments of dialogue and back and forth between these two characters I really enjoyed. I thought they were a lot of fun. I thought there was like lots of quippy one-liners, like it was solid banter, but I think just sort of the basic premise of this book just wasn't doing anything for me. And when it's like a romantic kind of steamy read, if that basic like setup isn't working for you, then it's just going to impact your enjoyment. And that's what I found with this book. Like, I have such a like don't shit where you eat attitude to like office romances. Like, I just don't understand why you would want that. And maybe that's particularly amplified because it's like a publishing office romance, and that just like, it made me roll my eyes a little bit. Maybe it was too close to home. It was just like, I just cannot get into this fantasy at all. But also we learned so much about Josh's kind of background and his history, and like an explanation for why he is this kind of asshole that he is, basically because he's got daddy issues. Like, we get so much of that, and I don't feel like we really learned that much about Lucy at all. So there were definitely elements of this book that I found really entertaining, that kind of like quippy back and forth between these two characters. I enjoyed their flirting, but there were also elements of this book that I found kind of eye roll worthy. So a bit of a mixed bag for me on this one. While we're talking about romance books, let's talk about some non-fiction that has to do with love. This is Conversations on Love by Natasha Lunn. Now, in this book, the author is exploring various different kinds of love, you know, both the romantic and the sexual, but also familial, parents, friendships. And she's discussing these topics with numerous people who have lots of thoughts on these subject matters, including Candice Carty-Williams, Roxane Gay, Diana Evans, Lisa Taddeo. Like, there's lots of different voices in this book. And it was really interesting to get all of these different kind of perspectives on what love is. I particularly found the conversations around romantic love and friendship love really interesting. The stuff on kind of like sibling love and familial love, love of a child, they were things that I connected with less because they're not huge considerations in my life, but I really appreciated getting the different perspectives on romantic, sexual, and friendships love. I'm definitely at that stage where a lot of my friendships have shifted over the past couple years. There's definitely some friendships that have kind of dimmed or faded for various reasons, and I think that's something that like we don't kind of discuss enough, particularly like in your 20s, and how difficult it can be when that kind of thing happens. I'm also, you know, I'm dating. I've been around the block with dating over the past few years, and I have some thoughts, and it was interesting to hear other people's thoughts. And I think some of the sections on those topics are definitely things that I will revisit if I feel like I'm particularly feeling some emotions on those areas of my life. Next, I have some YA. I have The King is Dead by Benjamin Dean. This is a proof copy. Of course, it says Long Live the Scandal on the front, and the actual book comes out on the 7th of July. You may recognize the name Benjamin Dean for Me, My Dad, The End of the Rainbow and The Secret Sunshine Project. This is a book that I got from work, so just full disclosure there. but I absolutely loved this book. I loved both of Benjamin Dean's middle grade books, but to have a YA book from him, I am obsessed. I loved this book. So this book is about James, who from the day of his birth, only minutes before his twin brother, he has been destined to become the King of England. But this happens far sooner than expected when his father unexpectedly dies when James is just 17 years old. So not only is he thrust into this place of responsibility at such a young age, but he also bears the responsibility of being the first black and queer king. Tabloid attention is not something that is new to James. For years, the tabloids have been sniffing around in his personal life, in his love life, trying to uncover what they can about his personal goings on. But of course, this is amplified when he is set to become king, as is the racial prejudice that he faces. Unfortunately, I think Benjamin Dean's depiction of what it would be like to have the first black king of England feels incredibly authentic to how this would play out in real life, which is, you know, disappointing to say the least. There was a particularly powerful moment at the end of chapter 15, which to be honest is one of the best written scenes in a YA book that I've read for such a long time. It was such an incredibly powerful scene. And not only is the author engaging with these discussions on racism and homophobia, but he has also crafted this absolutely fantastic roller coaster mystery, because things take an even more sinister twist for James when green envelopes start showing up that threaten to leak family secrets, and James doesn't know who he can trust, and neither do you as the reader. I thought that I had figured out what was going on, and then there was like another twist. I did not figure out what was going on. I thought the queer romance in this was also absolutely incredible. It's a royal reimagining full of scandalous secrets, roller coaster romances, and one hell of a mystery. Highly recommend you pick this one up when it comes out. I also read Teacher's Dead by Benjamin Zephaniah. Benjamin Zephaniah is a writer that I greatly admire, not only for his fiction but for his poetry too. This is some of his writing for younger readers. I thought his books Gangster Rap and Refugee Boy were incredibly well accomplished and dealt with some very hard-hitting but important topics, and this book is no different. This is a book that follows Jackson in the aftermath of his school teacher Mr. Joseph being stabbed by two of his fellow pupils in front of him. Jackson cannot understand what he has just witnessed, not only because it was a horrific act of violence, but because he doesn't understand the motivation of the two teenagers that killed Mr. Joseph. He doesn't understand why this teacher that was respected and liked, and he doesn't understand why these two students. So Jackson takes some investigation into his own hands. He wants to try and figure out why this has happened, what the motivation was. And as he delves further into his discoveries, he realizes the importance of figuring out why people do criminal acts. It's a book that really highlights the complexities of people's circumstances. It's a book about forgiveness and understanding, and it's a book about peace. It's a book that highlights the importance of taking the time to recognize the morally grey. I thought this was such a powerful book. I think Benjamin Zephaniah absolutely nailed the voice of his young protagonist, as he did in the previous books that I've read from him for younger readers. They are for younger readers, but they do handle, of course, some very serious, hard-hitting topics, so do be aware of that if you are recommending them to younger readers in your life. But I also think there is so much of value that you can get from his books as an adult reader. I think Benjamin Zephaniah is just absolutely cemented as one of my favourite writers of all time. And the final book I want to talk to you about is Pages & Co. Tilly and the Map of Stories by Anna James. This is the third book in the Pages & Co. series, a series that I come to for just pure joy and comfort and cozy vibes. In the first book we meet Tilly, who lives with her grandparents and helps out in their bookshop, and we discover that Tilly has this magical power to book wander. So not only can she interact with her favourite characters from some of her favourite books, but she can also take a step inside those fictional worlds. In the first book, we are welcomed into the wonders of book wandering, and in the second book, we take a journey into the complexities of this world, the tensions of this world. We learn more about the individuals who would like to control book wandering for their own gain and may not have the best intentions. And that mystery of figuring out more about the nature of book wandering, who you can trust in this community of book wanderers, is explored more in this third book. And we're also learning more about Tilly's identity as well. Very Very excitingly, in this book, Tilly and her best friend Oscar get to interact with William Shakespeare, and I really enjoyed seeing Anna James's depiction of that very famous historical and literary figure. These books are just so much fun. Like, every time I read one of these books, it's a book that I read in one sitting in bed with like chocolate and a cup of tea. It's just pure like cozy vibes. And if that's something that you think you would enjoy, or a younger reader in your life would enjoy, a big recommendation for this series from me. I have the fourth book in this series waiting on my shelf. Both this book and the fourth book were very kind gifts from Caris, and I just love how these hardbacks look on my shelves as well. I just love them. They're so much fun. So there we have it. They are all of the books that I read in May. If you want to find out more about them, they will all be linked down below in the description. If you have any thoughts on any of the books that I've mentioned, do leave me a comment down below, or if you don't have anything in particular you want to say, but you want to let me know that you're here, leave me a crown emoji for The King is Dead. I'd also love to know what you've been reading in May. Was there a favourite book on your list? I feel like I had a really great reading month. Like, there were lots of books that I thought like absolutely slapped, and even the books that I didn't think absolutely slapped, like I had a really good time, and like I enjoyed the critical engagement that I had with them. I actually think one of the best reading months that I've had in a really long time. So I hope June brings me more of the same. Anyways, that's it from me. I hope you guys are doing well, and I will speak to you in my next video.